Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my page 112 tag video for July 2026. This is also my Buzzwordathon video for July 2026, and if you want to go to that part of the video, click to this timestamp right here. The page 112 tag was started by Sean Breathe's books. He based it off of a French literary prize wherein the long list of said prize was comprised solely by reading page 112 of the books in contention. And these books were all novels, and so page 112 in most novel-length books is supposed to be somewhere in the middle, past all of the polished for editors pages, where you get the raw, real writing. And without the context of the rest of the story, you can only judge based on the quality of said writing. So I've been using this tag ever since the beginning of COVID, monthly, to slowly whittle down my physical TBR shelves while building them back up again. I have this handy dandy books and cats mug, and inside there's these pieces of paper. These are titles that I've acquired in 2025 or earlier. And every month I go ahead and I pick out randomly 3 pieces of paper, and then they have titles on them, and I go ahead and I grab them, read page 112 with you, and decide which one of the books will I add to this month's TBR. Or at least that's how I usually play the game. Every 4th month I do things a little bit differently. I stir things up a little bit, and I take the runners-up from the past 3 months and pit them against each other for a second chance. I chose July as one of my months to do this because it is my birthday month, and it's a little bit of a birthday gift to myself to have a little less post-production to do, because I already have my books picked out and the clips have been already created in these past months. But it's a double-edged sword because I actually do randomly like picking out pieces of paper and the surprise of it. But that's how I've, organized my reading year with this TBR game. And here comes the AC, because it is summer, and this particular game, things are a little more manufactured even than usual, which I'll get into. But to start with, let's just go back over the books, going back in time. If he could only manage to finally convince the British, who were a fundamentally civilized and moral people, that we, their subjects suffering here in a far-flung corner of the empire, are really wonderful, cultured, civilized, book-reading, poetry and philosophy-loving people, then at once they would undergo a change of heart, and all of the misunderstandings would be removed. Then, at last, both they and we would be free to sit face to face and talk to one another properly about the things that were, when all was said and done, the meaning and purpose of life. Once or twice the officer tried to get in a word edgewise, to ask a question, or perhaps only to take his leave and get on with doing his duty. But no force in the world could halt father in full spate, blind and deaf to the world, as he continued with the ardor of a zealot, revealing the treasures of his shrine. The thin officer could only murmur from time to time, "Indeed," or "How very interesting," as though he was under a spell. The 2 soldiers began to whisper to one another. The burned one stared foolishly at my mother. His friend chuckled and scratched himself. Mother, for her part, had seized the hem of the curtain, and her fingers were moving desperately from one pleat to the next, straightening, kneading, stretching each pleat separately. How about me? My duty was to find some secret way of warning father, who was gradually drawing the British officer toward the deadly shelf. But how could I? All I was able to do was at least not look in the direction it was better not to look. Suddenly, the brown paper package succumbed to an urge to turn traitor. It started to make itself conspicuous, to stand out in the row of books, like a fang among milk teeth, looking out of place, and different from the others in color, height, and thickness. Okay. So this one, I think it took a little while to get into, but what I think is happening, it feels there's a lot of tension on this page as well, where we have, first of all, I guess I'll say that I would assume we are dating this story to the British Mandate of Palestine. And let's just be real. I remember the cover copy about how this is a fictionalized account of Amos Oz's experience at the end of the British Mandate. So there we go. So he would probably be the young boy, and he's with his parents. Well, I don't know for sure, man. This doesn't necessarily sound like his parents from his actual memoir, but in this page, it seems like the father is going on some sort of tear with a British officer and two soldiers, and you know, talking about, like, you know, if only we could understand each other, some sort of thing. It's like just like a full-on tear, which maybe could be a sense of zealotry, but maybe they're doing some sort of mission to obscure something, because this paper bag suddenly is a really big deal, and the son, or the, well, I'm going to assume son because almost Oz, is sitting there like we can't actually turn these officers' attention to this paper bag, which apparently on its own at the end of the page is making itself more conspicuous anyway, and meanwhile the mother is acting definitely very anxious in one of those really great ways to talk about anxiety, where she's sitting there and like just over straightening pleats, and so you know that she's, you know, anxious. So yeah, there's a lot going on here too, and I kind of like the tension, and I like the sort of overzealous behavior, which is indicative, I think, of a lot of Oz characters. Amy, though, she would rely on her daughter to be her eyes. Amy, who was attached to the hotel, but not with the same fierceness. She could see its flaws. The grandchildren, too, but Louise wasn't particularly interested in their criticism. Zack was wearing a t-shirt with Che Guevara on it, though Louise doubted he knew who he was. Or at least she hoped he didn't, not that she intended to get into a political debate with the boy who'd needed an extra year to complete a geography degree, and who probably couldn't find Cuba on a map. Though he had given them all a shock when he'd inquired about the business terms of the offer. That was more than Maddie had had to offer. She had blathered on about mothballs for most of the evening. "Sweetheart, I was just thinking about you," Louise said when she bumped into her daughter in the corridor leading up to the boardroom. To her surprise, Amy had traded last night's flats for a kitten heel, and she looked rosy for the morning summit. Was that bronzer on her cheekbones? Bravo, Louise wanted to say. Amy's dress was a black cotton with a small daisy design, belted at the waist, a modern take on an older silhouette. She was happy to see a return in fashion to celebrating feminine curves. Those androgynous outfits some women wore, they made Louise shudder. Imagine a woman wearing a tuxedo to the Oscars and all the critics cheering her on. Unthinkable, truly. Andy the blouse man, who came to the hotel on Tuesdays, was the person who had first taught Louise the importance of cinching at the waist. He taught many of the women at the hotel a heck of a lot more than just fit. When his trailer door was shut, it signaled a private showing to a good customer. Okay, so there's a lot going on this page. I feel like, to a certain degree, it's relatively easy to follow. Louise, we're in her head. She's the matriarch of a sort, at least the oldest member of all the family members, and she wants to come to some sort of serious sort of decision about the hotel, which, you know, my bias would say might have something to do with the fact that this is their last summer at the Grand Hotel, and they're trying to figure out what to do with it next. And Louise cottons onto her daughter completely to say, you know, she's sentimental, but, you know, she won't go too far with that. And the grandchildren, she's mostly judgmental about. Like, one is kind of, I guess, vapid in terms of what she had to offer, and the other one, you know, is politically unfit or whatever. So yeah, you know, you can tell from the off too, this character does, you know, have a lot of character. You know, she's judgmental about a lot of things and a lot of people. You know, that's kind of, you know, fun to follow in a way. A little eye-rolly about, you know, the commentary, I suppose, about fashion and all of that. Like, just let people live, lady. I don't know. Meanwhile, then it, like, you know, I think the ending is a little, you know, it just takes us in a completely different direction. I don't know if that's saying something about the character, you know, being flighty or, you know, not being able to focus, but suddenly she's remembering the past about the tailor, or at least I think it might be the past. I'm not sure. But then, you know, the very end of that last paragraph seems to imply that this tailor was having relations, but maybe that's me reading more into it than I should. Anyway, I mean, I do feel like a lot of these characters really pop, but, you know, it is like a lot going on the page, not necessarily a whole lot of focus. His father was leaving the gas station and crossing the street when a bus slammed into him. He died instantly, and Felix and his mother, whose house overlooked that bad corner and the bridge, would have to relive that scene over and over again. The message on the back of the postcard addressed to the Sabos was, "Beginnings and endings, in bridges in between. Thanks for everything." Gombies. The summer my family invited Eric to visit Bermuda was the year my father invited 2 Gombi tribes to stop at our house for refreshments between destinations. In an instant, our house was overflowing with people streaming through every doorway. It was like one of those movies where there was a knock on the guy's front door, and when he opens it, there's a sea of faces and streams of kids come pushing in through the doorway. Instant party. I think that was weird science. Well, okay, you know, earlier on I was thinking maybe the game was being kind to me by, you know, letting me play with one book I've played with before, but now I'm wondering if, you know, it's giving me a taste of my own medicine because I cheated, and this page is not the happy vacation type style page I might have hoped for. You know, we start with a horrible death, and the promise of the family having to relive it. So, wow, that is a harrowing start, and it completely doesn't jive, it seems like, with the second part of the page where we go to a new section, which seems much more promising and about, you know, the narrator's father inviting people into the home and, you know, some sort of, hopefully, you know, friendship or companionship. At least I hope it's a better scene than the one before it. So yeah, that's a little jarring. It might just be, you know, how this essay is set up with these little segments or whatever, and certainly, well, I'd have more context for the father if I knew more of it, but it was jarring enough to see his death there. So yeah, intense page, very intense page. Womp womp. I tried to make new sounds to return us to the present, and this one feels apropos for the shenanigans I may be pulling now, but to do a little bit of a recap. My April book was Panther in the Basement by Amos Oz. My May book was Last Summer at the Golden Hotel by Alyssa Friedland. And my June book was Airy, short stories by Lee Ann Lyles. And this is the reason for my, you know, dancing around and teasing shenanigans, because I went out of my way to go ahead and get this book on this particular TBR game, meaning that I didn't pick it out at random in my last, my June TBR game. I set it aside to deliberately pick out, and then I set it aside deliberately as a runner-up to put into this game so that I would be reading it this month in July in part of a short story tag that I'm about to do. And the main reason I decided to do this was because this is a set of short stories, well, you've already heard me talk about how they're set in Bermuda, and I actually am going back to Bermuda on a cruise next week as I'm filming this, so I really wanted to get to reading these short stories. You know, it's an indie author, self-published. I thought it'd be a nice way to kind of get into the mood and the space. And also, I only have so many books, technically, in my TBR jar, more bug, as it were, so... And I was a little hesitant if I took this one out without the contours of the game around it. I wouldn't have enough books left to play with for the rest of the year. So those are my excuses, and that's why I will be reading this book this month. Okay, and now on to the Buzzwordathon. Those of you who are familiar with booktubers and big-name booktubers might be aware of the Buzzwordathon, which was started several years ago by Kayla at Books and Lala. She is adept at taking trends and publishing from the year before, and then she creates a year-long reading list and tries to apply those trends month by month to reading options. So she started with title prompts, where, you know, it was trends in titles that were popular and are popular. And then a couple of years ago, she moved on to cover prompts and trends in covers that are popular. And I thought the cover prompts particularly would be a good or decent fit for me and this particular huge book haul I did last year, the Raid the Shelves book haul. The Raid the Shelves book haul is, well, the Raid the Shelves event, I should say, is put on by the Jewish Book Council, an organization whose website I basically live on. And once a year, usually, they open their offices in Manhattan to anyone who wants to buy a ticket, and you can like bring in suitcases and cart out as many free books as you want, all sorts of books that they've acquired through publishers and what have you. And so I've done this now for 2 years, and I acquired like 21 books last year, and I'm using Buzzwordathon, and particularly the cover prompts, to justify, you know, this extravagance and try to read them relatively quickly. So as you can see, I have been reading each prompted book month by month this year. Huzzah! And now we are into the second half of the year, and the prompt for July is a metallurgic cover. And this is where I'm doing shenanigans again, because technically speaking, my books that I'm acquiring from Raid the Shelves, they're mostly, you know, contemporary and historical fiction books, but a lot of the prompts that Kayla thinks up I think are more genre oriented, and that's what I think of when I think of metallurgic. Like that, I feel like that's something that's more often seen on like sci-fi or fantasy covers, and I didn't have anything explicitly like that on any of my covers, but that's why I decide to play a little bit creatively sometimes, and that's why I'm going to be reading from Berlin Atomized by Julia Kornberg. And I'm kind of going by, you know, something she even mentioned in the video that she made at the beginning of the year about, you know, maybe something that's a little bit shimmery or, you know, I don't know, kind of implicates some sort of movement. I think that part is a little more my interpretation than what she said. But that's why I figured like this particular font, there's something, you know, kind of like shaky and static about it, and like it's reactive to something. And she did definitely talk about like reactive elements on a metallurgic cover, and not just something that's like a stasis. So I feel like in a certain light I can get away with putting this on my TBR, so that's what I'm gonna do. And that about covers it for me now. I'm going to leave the Goodreads reviews for all of these books listed down below in case you'd like more information, as well as my playlist for this TBR game and information to the Buzzwordathon. And expect me back on this channel for my aforementioned short story tag video where I'm going to be slotting this book into it. So I am going to be reading it very soon, huzzah, and giving you my thoughts. So I hope you're okay with my fudging the rules a bit of my own TBR game. I feel like sometimes it's justified because the most important thing is to actually get some reading in, particularly of books you already own and, you know, would like to, you know, check off the list. So that's what I feel like I'm doing with this one. And yeah, other than that, I also hope you're enjoying your reading, however you get books onto your TBR lists. And thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.